Hey everyone, can you hear me? Please send a thumbs up in the Discord channel if you hear me.
Hello? Can you hear me? Test, test. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so welcome to the third session. We'll be creating the work desk that I sent out last week. I've also streamed the full process on Twitch too, so if you wanted to see that, feel free to go to my channel and watch it. Just to change things up a little bit and also provide a recording afterwards, I decided to switch our format to a Twitch stream and then questions on Discord. So anyone in this public channel, I'm not going to be answering any questions, but if you do want to join our next workshop, feel free to join at the link below on my stream. But otherwise, let's get into it. Okay, I'm just going to quickly share my other Blender file. Okay, so this is what we're going to be creating for the next few sessions. It is a simplified version of what I've created for the full render. You'll notice there's no the board on the left here. That it's not present. I believe I deleted some objects on this desk too, just to make sure that we're fitting everything within the 3 weeks. If we happen to go over time, then we'll have to extend it a little bit, but I don't see it extending more than 3. But we will start building out the main objects, so the desk, the chair, the drawer here, and then we'll start focusing on the little ones on the desk, and then this clock as well. You'll notice this is it's pretty stylized, so the corners here, they're a little bit exaggerated. Same with this display, the corners are very rounded, which gives it a very unique look. And I've kind of went with this style for most of my renders. But again, if you feel like that's too rounded or too playful for your taste, feel free to change some of the corner properties that we'll be using in this stream. But otherwise, I'm just gonna jump right into it. Okay, going back to a new file, let's open up Blender. And if you happen to fall behind, there will be more advanced techniques that we'll be dealing with. So if you happen to fall behind, feel free to let me know in Discord and I'll try to slow down a bit. So I've opened up Blender. Just gonna delete everything here, as always. And then we're gonna start with adding the reference images. So just gonna hit number 1 on my numpad. So I'm at the front view. Shift A to add an image reference. And let's go to the file or the folder that I sent you. And if you go into the export folder, you'll see this image. So I'm just going to load that in and just shift it up a little bit, GX or GZ, and shift it to the right, GX, and just move it aside so we have room for the main objects. Okay, let's start with the background. So this purple background, I'm going to add a plane, and I'm going to scale that by 4 units. So hit S, hit 4 on your numpad, and that'll increase in size. And then I'm going to go into edit mode by hitting tab, and let's, with the edge selected, that's the number 2 on your keyboard, select this edge on the back, and let's move that up by, or let's extrude it by 6 units. So it's going to be E to extrude, and then Z to constrain it against the Z axis, and then 6 units, numpad 6. And we're just going to curve this. So again, the bevel modifier is, or sorry, the bevel tool is Control B, and I'm just going to make 5 faces here. I'm just going to make it so that it reaches the second block here. And then let's tab out. I'm going to enable Shade Smooth, and we'll leave the background like that. And everything else is going to be in front, but by doing the smooth background, we're going to have that nice background, the purple background. Okay, let's add in a cube for our desk. Actually, let's add in a plane instead. And for now, let's hide this plane, the background plane. So just hide it with this eye icon here. And then I'm going to hit 7 so that I can see the grid view for the desk. And I'm just going to hit tab, scale it, so S, scale it along the Y, and I'm just going to make it into half. So it's going to be 0.5, or just manually adjust that with your mouse. And then mouse click to confirm. And then I'm just going to increase it along the X by 2 of these smaller units. So S, X. And then just increase that a little bit. And then let's go to the side view by hitting numpad 3. And let's increase or extrude it by let's do 2 units here. So 2 big units. So it should be around this thickness. And then as you'll notice in the image here, the 4 corners have a little bit more roundness than the top and bottom. There's two ways to go about rounding these corners, which is something that I wanted to touch upon in this render. But if you go to the modifiers panel here and hit add, there is a bevel modifier. So far we've been manually adding these bevels by hitting Control B and then using a mouse to adjust that bevel value. But if you went to the modifiers panel and hit bevel here, that will do that for you automatically. And then you can adjust the value. Right now I only have it at 1 segment, but if you increase the number there, that will create more segments. So the benefit of this is if you ever created a modifier or a bevel by default, so if I did this by default or by hand, there's no going back to it. So that you would have to undo it manually to cancel that out. But the bevel modifier, if you just removed it, then that's it. Like it's kind of touching on the concept of I believe it's called non-destructive modeling. But basically, if you have this bevel modifier applied, and then later on in the render you created a bunch of objects and you wanted to cancel that, you would have to either create that object and hand bevel it, or you can just cancel it out like this and then start over again. So that's kind of the benefit. But the downside of this is it has to be uniform on all four sides. So for example, in the image here, I wanted the four corners to be more rounded than the top and bottom face. But there's no way to do that with this bevel modifier. So for now, we're just gonna model this by hand. Just can't delete that bevel modifier for now. And we're gonna select the object, hit tab, and just select those four corners with the edge select tool. Okay, and then hit Control B, and we're also gonna round it by 5 faces by this much. And then now I'm just gonna go to the face select, which is 3 on your keyboard, or this tool here, and then select the top and bottom face because we want to curve the edges on that. Hit Control B, and then just slightly curve that edge. Okay, and I'm just going to shade smooth that and move it up by around 1 unit. So I just hit numpad 1 to go to front view, and moving it up the Z axis there. So now we have the desktop. We're gonna create the legs, and we're gonna use the mirror modifier that we touched upon last week. But let's start with creating that one leg first. I'm gonna go to front view, numpad 1, Shift A to add a cylinder, and I'm just gonna change the vertices value here to, let's say 12. So the reason I'm doing this is for some objects in this render, you won't be needing too much details on it. So for example, you'll see this little wood between the backrest and then the cushion on the bottom. So this doesn't need too much detail because it's very small. Same with the bevel on the keyboard, the keys on the keyboard. You won't be seeing that unless you zoom in quite a bit. Same with this one. If you, for the legs itself, we're going to be scaling it down like this, and at the end of the day, you won't be seeing the curves, or I guess these angles on the curve. So that's why I'm decreasing it, and that will save you render time later on when you actually want to export it. So we've added that cylinder, decreased the number of faces on it. So I'm just going to scale it down, excluding the Z. So that's, if you hit S and Shift Z, you're going to exclude the Z axis when you're scaling it. And I'm just going to scale it down to about this size. And obviously this is a little bit too long. So we're going to just select the bottom face here, go into edit mode, select that bottom face, and going back to front view, I'm just going to move it up to this red line. So GZ, move it up. And for this one, we will scale, or we will bevel the bottom as well. So with that face selected, just hit Control B, and you'll notice it's not perfectly round, and that's because we didn't scale it. So this Z value is different from the X and Y. So we're just going to go back to edit mode, hit tab, Control A to reset the scale. Okay, and that should reset this scale value. Now go back to edit mode, do the same thing, Control B, and we're just going to bevel it to about this much. Oh yeah, Adam just mentioned that you can hold Control to snap, which is a good point. So if you ever had to move an object, Control would snap it to the grid. And then if you hit Move and Shift, that will be, you're going to get more precise editing. So you'll notice that it's going a little bit slower than if I don't press Shift. So those are some tips there. Okay, so we've created one leg. We're going to shade smooth that in object mode. Shade smooth, like so. And then hit 7 on your numpad to go to top view. And we are going to go to wireframe mode. So hit Z, and then you'll see the 4 options here. We're going to hit wireframe. Just move it towards that direction and unpress your Z button. And then we're going to add the mirror modifier. So in the same modifiers panel, let's go down to mirror, which is on the, it's in the second column towards the center. And then I'm just going to hit tab and select. Right now the bottom face is only selected, but we're going to select the whole thing by hitting A. And then go back to top view. I'm going to move this by hitting G and just place it here on the bottom left. Once that's done, hit Y so that we're mirroring it against the Y as well. And just to recap, if we did this in object mode, it won't work because, let me just undo. If we did it in object mode, you'll notice the object is moving with that object origin, so that orange dot. Whereas if we went into edit mode and moved the object, we're just moving that 3D model and keeping that origin in place. So always when you're tweaking something in mirror modifier, make sure you're in edit mode and you're tweaking the location of things. Okay, so we have the 4 legs. It is going into the desk a little bit, and that bothers me, so I'm just gonna change that. By selecting that front face or the top face and moving it down a little bit. And we have a desk. And I'm just going to move this a little bit closer. Next thing we're going to do is the chair. So we're going to start with the cushion here where the person sits, and then maybe the legs, and then the wood that holds the backrest, and then the backrest. So let's go ahead and create that main cushion. I'm just going to hit plane. And let's scale it by half. So I'm just going to hit S.5. And this seems a little bit big, but we're going to work with this for now. I'm going to move it out on the Y, so it's in front of the desk. And then let's go into edit mode, extrude it by let's say 1.5 of these smaller units, maybe a little bit less. And then for this this object itself, it's not perfectly square, so it's not like a perfect rounded corner, and I wanted to do that intentionally. If I just beveled these 4 corners, this is like a perfect square still, but what I've done is skewed the, I guess this, scaled it along the Y so that it's a little bit shorter, and then also made this, like the center of this cushion, a little bit wider than the rest of the backplane. So we're gonna do the same thing. Just scale it a little bit along the Y, and let's make 2 cuts here. So that's the Control R for loop cuts, Control R again, and 2 cuts along the horizontal axis there. And we're just gonna increase the size on these two edges. So select it by Alt clicking on one of these, and it'll select the whole loop. And then SY, make that portion a little bit wider. And then we're gonna also go ahead and select the 4 corners here and round it the same way we did with the desktop. Oh, actually, I don't think that's how I did this. Let's leave it like this for now, and let's go into modifiers and hit subdivision surface. That's also on the second column here. And once you do that, we'll have to go back to solid view, so hit Z, select solid. You'll notice that by creating this subdivision modifier, it adds more geometry and more curves to it. And this is intended. I wanted to make it a little bit more curved than the desk here. So if you increase the viewport level of how many levels of geometry we want, you'll slowly notice that it becomes a little bit more curved. And this is how it should look, but I think the top and bottom face needs to be a little bit more flat. So let's just create 2 loop cuts here. And once you do that, you'll notice that it becomes a bit more flat. So we're basically taking the vertices on this 3D model and creating a curve out of it. So the more edges or geometry you have on the base object, that's going to make it a little bit more angled on the edges. So if I move this up, for example, you'll notice that it becomes a little bit more angled on the top only. And then same thing, if I move it towards the bottom, it becomes more angled towards the bottom. But I think this is what I wanted it to look in the first place, but it does look a bit too big. So let's scale it in edit mode. So hit A to select everything, scale it down a little bit. Let's say 4 units here, 4 grid units, and then tab out. Let's shade smooth that. And looking at the image right now, it does look a little bit flatter or thinner than this. So let's just increase it on the Z axis. So SZ, increase it a little bit. Okay, that looks more accurate. And then let's just move it up a little bit, maybe halfway up. And that is your base. Now we're going to do the same thing with the legs. We're going to use the mirror modifier. So go back to wireframe view, hit 7 if you haven't already to go to top view, and let's add a cylinder. And I noticed that I haven't moved the 3D cursor, so we want to have this 3D cursor oriented on the chair so that the cylinder gets added there. So with this chair selected, If you haven't deleted that cylinder, delete it and select the chair. We're going to hit Shift S, and this will bring up options to tweak either the location of your selected object or the 3D cursor. So for now, let's do cursor to selected on the bottom, and that 3D cursor snaps to the origin point of your selected object. Okay, and then with that done, let's do Shift A, add a cylinder. And for this one, I think we can go a little bit less number of faces because we're going to scale it down by quite a bit. So let's change that to 8. Press S, scale it down to maybe about this. And then I'm just going to go to front view or side view, 1 or 3. And then if you hit 3, that changes to face select. And just select that bottom face. And move it down to the red. And then just using Adam's tip in Discord, if I hit G Control, it'll snap on those little squares. But I want it to snap onto that red line. And let's just check if we have uniform scale value. So we do. We could reset it, but if XYZ is the same, it doesn't really matter. So in edit mode, hit Control B and create that bevel. I'm just decreasing it a little bit because we won't need that much detail. Okay, once that's done, select that top face of the leg, and you'll notice in the image we have the top face or the top portion of that leg a little bit thinner than the bottom. So we're just going to go ahead and scale that by selecting the top face and then scaling it by hitting S. Just by a little bit, doesn't have to be too much. If you think that the chair leg is too thin, you can go ahead and tweak the bottom here. You would want to constrain it against the X and Y only. So with the bottom selected, hit S, Shift Z to exclude Z, and then you'll be able to tweak that. And then if you feel like it's a little bit too flat, you can also scale it along the Z like so to make it a bit more rounded. But you would have to bring it up above this X axis. Okay, once you've done that, let's add the mirror modifier. And nothing happened just yet because we're mirroring against this origin point, which is at the center of our object. So let's go to edit mode, hit A to select all the faces, and we're going to drag it to the bottom left as well. And then select Y to mirror against the Y. And now you have a nice little chair, or a stool, I'd say. The image has these legs a little bit outwards, so let's do that. We're just going to select the bottom bevel here on one of them, hit 7, and you'll notice on the top face it's hard to tell, but you'll see some unselected faces here because we haven't selected everything. So hit G to move it, and we're just moving the bottom bevel outwards by a little bit. And that we can't really tell, so I'm just going to move it out a little bit more. Like so. That is better, but I do want my legs to be enclosed here. So I'm just going to select everything by hitting A and then moving all my legs inwards, like so. And looking at it now, it does look a bit low, so I'm just going to raise my cushion a bit upwards so that it meets the top face of my leg. Now let's go ahead and create those two connector stands between the backrest and the cushion. So with going back to top view, I'm going to add another cylinder. Let's keep it at 8 and just scale it down. And if you hit G in this perspective, it won't move around on the Z axis because we're looking at it from a top view. So it'll only move against the X and Y. Same thing, if you go to the side view, it's not going to move along the Y because right now we don't have depth on the Y axis. So we're only moving it against the X and Z. So if we go to top view, I'm just going to move this towards before we do that, I'm going to go into edit mode first because we're going to have to use the mirror modifier again. So let's move this down to the second line, or the first loop here, loop cut. And let's add the mirror modifier. And you'll immediately see those two stands there. It is a bit low, so let's go to object mode, hit G, let's move that up above this cushion, and going back to edit mode, I'm just going to increase the height of this. So select the top face, GZ, raise it up a little bit, and then for the backrest, I believe I used the same object for both the backrest and the cushion. So I'm just going to duplicate this and maybe decrease the height a little bit because it does look shorter. But we're just going to rotate it so it stands on the two cylinders that we just created. So with this base selected, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. And this cylinder here, we're going to just place it on top of this. So let's go to side view. If you hit 3, that'll transition to the side view. Let's move it up a little bit, rotate it along the X axis. So if I hit R, actually I would have to do that outside of the side view. So just scroll your mouse and you'll immediately exit side view. How to lock object movement only on? So you have to hit the command first. So for move it's G, and then just hit X to move it along the X, and Y to move it along the Y, and then Z to move it along the Z. So it will be main command first, and then X, Y, Z depending on which direction you want it to move. Oh, X and Y all together. So that would be G, Shift Z, and that will exclude the Z axis. So let's go ahead, go to let's rotate this backrest along the Z. So X, RX, and then 90 degrees. So on my numpad, I'm going to hit 90. And let's go to side view, hit G, and move it up to here. And then as we said, it's a little bit too high. So I'm just going to decrease it in edit mode. Tab in SZ, scale down the height a little bit, go to object mode, bring it down. and I do want it to be a little bit smaller than my cushion, so I'm just going to scale it down altogether within object mode, and then just bring it down. If you're having a hard time viewing it, feel free to go back to solid, and then you'll see it more clearly. And I'm going to move it back a little. The reason why it moved forward is because we scaled it. When we scaled it, it scales towards this origin point, and I think that's, let's see, yeah. So it's scaling against that origin point, and to recenter this on the object, you just have to right-click, set origin to geometry, and that'll center it. So now if you scale it, it'll scale towards the center. So let's scale that down. Let's center it against the 2 cylinders there. And we also forgot to shade smooth on these 2. So shade smooth, and this one seems to be receiving, or producing some artifacts on this. So we're going to go to the object data property. I believe that's what it's called. Yeah, object data property, and then go to normals, auto smooth, change that to 60 degrees. Same with the legs here, shade smooth. This one seems to be okay. I'll auto smooth that anyways. Actually, it doesn't look too bad, so maybe we'll just leave it like that. And now the chair is rotated, and we want to rotate everything based on one parent object. Oh, it does. The backrest looks a little bit too small, so I'm just going to scale it up again. Okay, so maybe a little bit forward too. Okay, so now we want to parent all the objects we've just created to one object, so that when we move that one object, it just moves along together. Let's select everything here. And we always want the parent object to have that light orange outline. And when I do parenting, I try to parent it to the object that that is most noticeable, that I'll be clicking on. So I'm just gonna select this backrest, and then Control P, and then just select the second option there. And you'll notice these dotted lines, meaning that the origin, or this object, is parented to this object, and they're just linking the 2 origin points. So if you look at this, I'm going into wireframe view. You'll notice this origin point is linked to this one. So that's how you can tell if an object is parented or not. Same thing with the legs here. We have one origin point because we used a mirror modifier, but you'll notice that this one is connected to this origin point. Same with the backrest, same with the cylinder here. Okay, so with that being done, let's go back to solid view, and I'm just going to rotate it on the Z. So RZ, rotate it like so, and let's go to top view and just move it a little bit closer, like this. Okay, I was gonna model the drawer, but that might take a little bit longer, and I do want to break at 10. So let's create the monitor first. And I'm just gonna create the stand. Let me share the other window that I have open. So if you look at the back, we have this stand, and it's angled and it goes back into this display. And it's a similar design to the iMac displays. So we're just gonna replicate that design. Okay, let's create the stand first. I'm going to select the desktop. I want to spawn the object that for the stand to be placed on the desk directly, without me tweaking the location. So select the top plate here of your desktop, and then from here, if you select Shift S, cursor to selected, the 3D cursor goes directly on top of your desktop, like so. So now that's done, let's go back to object mode and let's add a plane. Scale it down. And let's move it back a little bit. And for this stand, the front part is a little bit wider than the back. So I'm just going to go to edit mode. Let's go to top view, numpad 7. And let's select either vertex select or edge select. So that's 1, 2 on your keyboard. S to scale. And I'm just going to move the front of that stand a little bit upwards, like so. And then let's create the shape of that stand first before we add depth to it. So just select the two vertices here, and then go to side view, hit E to extrude. And I'm just going to extrude it along the Z, but we will move it forward eventually by this much, maybe a little bit more. Okay, and then let's move that forward. I like being precise, so I always use the XYZ commands after my move or rotate commands, but you can totally just press G and just wing it. But I like constraining against an axis. With that being done, let's select the whole thing. And actually, before we add volume to that, I'm just going to round the front part of this. So going back to my image, it's a little bit rounded here. So I'm going to add that before I add volume to it. So with the vertex select tool, I'm going to select these two vertices, hit Control B, and then if you don't remember, you have to hit V again to bevel corners. So B and V, and then just round that by this much. Same thing with this here. Actually, before we go any further, let's extrude this part so it connects to the display that we'll be creating. So select the edge with edge select tool, and let's move it on the side a little bit towards the front. Like so. And let's select these two edges and let's bevel them. Control B. And since this is on the back, we don't have to add too much detail. I'm just going to decrease the number of loop cuts here, or the amount of bevels here. And this is what we get. It does look a little bit big on the front there, so I'm just going to select the front faces, maybe move it back a little bit. But this is just one single plane. There's no depth to it, so this is another tool that I use quite frequently. If you hit Alt-E, there's a number of extrude options. So far we've been doing the basic extrude, which is E, and that'll extrude it towards one axis. And sometimes that's not what you want. You want to extrude it along the face that has been rotated. So if you hit Alt E and select extrude faces along normals, you'll notice that you get depth all around like this. And you might not notice this, but it's not evenly distributed. So if you hit S, maybe I'll, just for demonstration purposes, I'll isolate this. And if I hit E, extend it outwards, and then if I hit S, there's a difference in depth or along the corners there. So if you want even thickness, you want to hit S and then confirm your depth there. But in this case, we don't have too much of a curve, so it won't be as noticeable. So let's select that option and just make sure that your edges here on the bottom, they don't overlap. So if I go to side view and zoom in, you'll notice as we keep doing this, they start overlapping, and that's not what you want. That's going to be very hard to fix later. So just extrude it enough so that those don't overlap. And let's say we're not happy with this. We do want to extrude it a little bit more without overlapping. Then we could undo that, go back to side view, and just extrude it outwards like this. If you wanted to add a little bit more thickness. And then we're just going to move it up so that it's not inside the desk. Okay, so with that being done, I'm just going to shade smooth, and let's do auto smooth in the data object properties. Change the angle so we remove those artifacts that show. And then if we go back to the image, you'll notice, actually it's hard to see, but this whole thing is rounded along the sides. And right now our sides are pretty flat. So we're just going to round these flat corners here. Let's do edge select by hitting 2. And then what I'm doing here is hitting Alt while clicking, and that'll select everything along that loop. But I do want to select multiple of connected loops. So before we do that, I'm going to go to wireframe view just so I can see those edges more clearly. And then with Alt held down, Alt and Shift held down, I'm just going to select all the edges here. So this is the top one that's going around. I'm going to select the bottom as well. So the inside edge. So once you selected everything, it should look like this. And I just realized that I could have just went to the face select and did this. But actually that wouldn't work because we're selecting the middle edges here. So what I was doing was right. Just go to edge select, select the outside, like so. And then Control B. Let's round that a little bit. And there you have it. That's the stand. I'm not going to curve these two edges because we're not going to be seeing that. It's going to be behind the display. And now we're going to create the actual display, which is basically a plane with depth and then adding a little bit of bevel to it. So let's, before we add it in, I want to add it on the stand so that we don't have to manually place it. With the stand selected, let's select this plane here, and same thing, Shift S, cursor to selected, and the cursor will center wherever you've selected an object or a face or edge. If I wanted to place an object on top of this, I could select this face, cursor to selected, same idea. If I wanted to center the cursor inside this object at a certain point, I can select two faces or two edges and cursor to select, and it would center wherever I've selected an object or an element in this object. So I use that quite a bit, but for this purpose, I'm just going to center against this plane. And then let's add a plane in object mode, tab out, Shift S, and plane. And let's just decrease it in size a bit before we rotate it. Why Alt plus E and not solidify? That is a good question. I could have used solidify, which is another modifier. Maybe we'll use that for this monitor, but I think it's just a matter of preference. I think if I use solidify, I would have to enter a number here or drag the slider, whereas if I did extrude along normals, I can just tweak it with my mouse. Solidify does give you the option to delete it, so that kind of goes back to the non-destructive modeling, but for this one I just chose to do Alt-E, which is the extrude along normals. But maybe we'll use that for this display. So with this selected, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and let's decrease it along the height. So SZ, I'm going to place it a little bit upwards, scale it up. Based on your preference, you might want a wide monitor, so you can scale it down a little bit more and tweak it that way. But for me, I use a 27-inch, so I'm just going to go with this ratio. And then we could just extrude it like this, but just for the purpose of using solidify and to see what that does, let's go to the modifiers panel and select solidify here. And what that does is it just adds volume to your object. So if I select, if I added this, let's add a little bit more thickness, and went to my object to tweak something, you won't be able to select these sides here because we're just adding a solidify modifier to this one plane. And right now it's going backwards, so let's just reverse the offset to 1 instead of -1, and that'll go the opposite way. And I don't want it this thick, so I want it a little bit thinner, maybe 0.15. And then if you wanted to confirm this change, you can apply a modifier, but modifiers you always have to apply in object mode. So tab out and then hit apply, and that should be able to, you should be able to tweak all 4 sides if you wanted to, like so. Before we do that, I want to try something. Let's go back. So with solidify applied, if I go ahead and add bevel, that applies to all 4 sides. So let's say you don't want to apply a change. Let's say you modeled an object and you foresee some changes later that you want to make. You don't want to apply this modifier. So you could just apply solidify and bevel, and then just tweak it this way. I don't see too many issues doing this because in the desktop, we wanted to have difference in bevel value for the corners and the top and bottom face. But for the monitor, I think it's okay if we just round it all around uniformly. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to add solidify bevel and then tweak the bevel value a little bit. So I'm using 0.04 and 3 segments. like so. And then just looking at this, it does look a bit rounder on the four corners here. So if you wanted to, you could remove the bevel and just, you know, extrude it the way we did. Extrude it like this, and then tweak these four corners, round it this way first, and then round the front and back. But for now, I'm just gonna stick with the first option where we had solidify and bevel. Okay, so if you need to see those values, it's here. And we do get a weird line here. And to remove that, you could either decrease the value of your bevel, because what's happening is you're overlapping the front and back bevel together. So if I keep increasing it, you'll notice at one point those meet, and then you see this line here. To prevent that, you could either increase the thickness of your monitor so that it separates a little bit more. But I don't want my display too thick, so I'm just going to decrease the bevel value for now. Yeah, 0.06 works for me. Okay, before we break, let's create one more face in the middle here, because that's what I'm doing here is I'm just applying two different colors to differentiate the screen and the frame. So let's just go back to this, and before we do anything, we will have to tweak this front face. So let's just apply the solidify modifier. I don't foresee any changes for this one. So apply, and the front face selected. With that selected, let's hit I to inset. And I think something is wrong here. We're not scaling uniformly, meaning that the scale values are probably off. So let's tab out, go back to this, and yeah, it's different values. So I'm just going to reset the scale. Control A, scale, and then let's go back to this front face and inset. So if you feel like your model isn't tweaking or scaling down or rotating uniformly, there is some, just take a look at these values here, and you'll find out that the scale value is not applied properly. So I just inserted this much. I wanted to cover one more thing before we break. If the corners don't have enough distance to apply a bevel, for example, let's say I want to create an inset and it's only this much. What the bevel modifier is doing is trying to create a bevel for each edge that we have that is angled. So for example, this one here doesn't have enough room to bevel this much, because we have this edge that is very close to this edge on the corner. It's not going to be able to apply a large bevel because we don't have enough room. So if you wanted to follow the rounded style that I'm trying to do here, you need to create an inset that gives this corner enough room to bevel. So with that done, actually I think this is too less of an inset, so I'm just going to inset it this much. And then there is a line here, which means I'm creating too big of a bevel. Okay. So with that, I think we're going to break. It does look a bit small. So during the break, if you want to tweak some values, feel free to do so. But let's break for up until 10:10 a.m. PST. So that's 9 minutes from now, and we'll pick it up from there. If you're falling behind, feel free to ask questions in Discord as a reminder, and I'll try to answer them during the break. welcome back. Oh, I just noticed there's a bunch of chat in Discord that I haven't, I wasn't aware of. Okay, let's continue. This monitor is way too small, so we're just gonna select the, let's select the monitor. And here's another tip. We're gonna parent these two things, but what I want to do is increase the size based on the bottom here. So if I went ahead and just increased it like this, you'll notice that it scales outwards, so it's gonna go inside the desk. What I want it to do is scale based on the bottom here, so that it scales upwards instead. Because that way I don't have to scale it and properly align it to the desk. There's less work in the long run, so I'm just gonna parent these two based on the bottom here. So let's select both. Make sure you have the bottom one selected, or bottom one have the light shaded orange, and then let's hit Control P. Select that second one, and now we just need to make sure that the origin point, so this orange dot, is sitting on the bottom plate of this. So let me just isolate this view. And if you look at the bottom, just select this face and do Shift S, cursor to selected, and that should orient the cursor so that it's sitting on the bottom of that plate. And then from there, let's go to object mode and convert set origin to 3D cursor. And let's go back to the original view. Hit slash on your numpad, and from here, if I select the stand and I scale it up, you'll notice it scales upwards now. It doesn't scale downwards inside to the desk, which is what I want. Let's zoom out, and just for scale, just to compare the scale, let's move it up a little bit. Didn't realize it was this small, but scale it up, and this stand is looking massive compared to my monitor. So in this case, you could just scale the monitor up like so, and then bring it up a little bit and just scale down the whole object again by clicking on the stand. So yeah, I would just do it that way. That seems like the most easiest at this point. Scale up the monitor and then scale down the object together so that it looks proportional. Okay, maybe a little bit bigger. You just want to make sure there's enough room for the two speakers and then the potted plant and the pencil case here. So just scale it however you think is appropriate based on what I just said. And we'll move it forward so that the stand isn't sticking out. Okay, so with that done, let's go to let's go with the drawer here. So I'm just gonna go back down, and I want to spawn the object so that it's sitting on this red line, so I can just move it over. Let's reset the 3D cursor to its origin point of the viewport. So you can do that by either hitting Shift C, and that should zoom out and reset the cursor, and just do Shift A or Shift S and cursor to world origin, and that should just bring it down here. And then with that, let's do Shift A, plane. And we're gonna scale it down so that the width of, or I guess the depth of this drawer is narrower than this desk. So if I just scale it down, maybe go to top view, scale it down, and just make sure that it's not sticking outside of the desk here. And then let's move it towards the left. And then we're just going to go to edit mode. And again, if it is much more convenient if you keep the origin point at the bottom, so that when we start extruding it upwards and adding drawers, and you want to scale the whole thing together, that's why I'm going into edit mode and then extruding it upwards so that the origin point stays at the bottom. And this is also very convenient if you wanted to animate this. Let's say I wanted to scale it up from the floor. You want to make sure that it's at the floor so that it scales upwards. So with this selected, let's go into edit mode, extrude it up. I believe it's around the same height as the desk, so I'm just going to keep it around that height. And then this front face here, you'll notice there's some empty space between the frame and the drawers. So by hitting I and setting this way, and then I want to hit 3 and then 9 again to flip the view. What I want to do now is I want to create a little bit of depth for the drawers. So if you go to wireframe view and hit E, you'll be able to see how much that goes in. So that was the purpose of orienting the camera to 3 and 9 to just flip that view. So I'm seeing this as the front view, but obviously like it's wireframe, so you could just go to side view and tweak it that way. You'll just have these desk objects in the way. So I prefer it to be on the other side, and it should be a little bit lighter so it's visible, but not too big of a difference. And then with that being done, let's go ahead and round the corners. I'm going to apply the bevel modifier in solid view. So go back to solid view, add modifier bevel, and let's see the scale value. Another thing, if you reset the scale, I always prefer resetting the scale just because it's just kind of covers any mistakes that I've done in the past. Let's do that for this too, and just scale down the bevel value here to about 0.15, and then increase the segment count here. And then I think there is a bug in Blender. I'm not quite sure if this is a bug or not, but there are instances where the bevel gets messed up, and I've seen this happening for oh, sorry, that is Boolean and bevel used together, but there are cases where the vertices just drastically change in location. So for example, like I've applied a bevel and Boolean together, and this would be offset by this much. That is a bug. So just letting you know if you come across that. But let's shade smooth. And then let me see if I can, yeah, so what I was trying to do is, if I went back to shade flat, this face here doesn't look that great. It's normal that it's there, but I wanted to change how it looks. So what I did was go into bevel geometry, and I just changed this to arc, and you'll notice this becomes more arced. and then I'm just going to shade smooth. So we get a nice little box to frame our drawers. And then from here, I want to create one drawer and just duplicate it upwards. So let's do that. Let's select this bottom plate here, and I want to 3D cursor on top of it. So Shift S, cursor. Actually, I think we don't have to do that. It's no worries if you've already done it, but I think it's better if we just use this existing face to create those drawers. So what I'm going to do is select that face, hit Shift D to duplicate it, and then you'll notice this gets duplicated. I'm just going to escape or right mouse button to keep it in place, and I'm just going to hit P to separate that. I'm just going to hit selection here. So now that one face is separated from the frame. Let's scale it down a little bit and move it upwards slightly so that we can see it. Okay, from here, let's do edit mode, extrude it up like so. And when you do, you want to make sure you have room for the other two. So I'm just going to go to front view and make sure I have enough room. In this case, it's better to have enough room than trying to overextend and not have enough, because we can tweak the space between the drawers to make sure that everything fits. So with that done, I'm going to use another modifier called array. So go back to your modifiers panel, hit array, and what that does is it just copies your object and places it right next to it. And from there on, you can tweak the spacing between objects. Right now, we are tweaking based on the X, but that's not what I want. I'm going to make the X factor 0, and let's tweak the Z so that it goes upwards instead. So I'm going to make this, if you say 1, that's always going to stick the two together like so. If you want a little bit of space in between, I usually go for 1.1. And I think what this is doing is taking, so that 0.1 is 10% of the object. So it's just adding 10% of that height between the two objects. So if you wanted to do 50% of the object height, then you can do 1.5, and that will apply it like so. But for now, let's do 1.1 and increase the count to 3. And you'll notice we have some space up here. So what we can do is go into edit mode again. What we could do here is either increase the height between the spaces between drawers, or just increase the height of the drawer itself so that it kind of reaches a certain point where we feel comfortable. So I'm going to do the latter, select the top face, and move that upwards, and that will change all 3 drawers. So if I go to the front, I just want to make sure that these are even. Again, I like to have even spacing all around, not just in between the drawers, but also around this. So what I could do is select the whole object, hit S, like so. And then if I move this up, just tweak the height of this, and it'll apply it to the other 2 here. So now I like how this is looking. I have even spacing around the drawers and also in between. And something else I noticed is not completely flush with this front face. So let's just select the front of this bottom drawer and then move it out. And if you want it to really be precise, you can go to side view wireframe and just bring that out. And I believe it's, yeah, that should be where the front is. Okay, let's go back to solid view, and we're gonna add the handles to this. And I want to go to the front face of this, and Shift S, I want to move the cursor to the center of that. So cursor to selected. And you want to be able to, you want to add the object within object mode because you want that duplicated, and you want the array modifier applied to both these two. So let's just within edit mode, select UV sphere. And for this one, we don't need this much geometry. We're gonna decrease the segment to maybe 6, and then rings to 4, maybe 6 and 8, 8 and 6. And then you'll notice immediately the array modifier applies to this. We're gonna scale it down. And as we do so, the drawers kind of come back down as well. And once you scale it at a certain point, it just scales the circle or the sphere. So let's just scale it down to about this size. I'm going to move it out. And this is a little bit more detailed, but I'm just going to make sure that the handle is connected to the drawer. So let's hit rotate R X 90 degrees. And even though viewers won't be able to see this, I'm gonna still extend it so it touches. So let's select these faces here. So if you go to wireframe view and select these, you can do it that way, or you can just isolate this. Oh, actually, isolate won't work. You would have to go to wireframe view and then maybe go to side view and select these faces here. And then from here, just extrude that. Hit E, extrude it into the drawer. And here's another tip. If I wanted to make this flat, right now there's a point that's sticking out. I could just adjust this one point and scale it or move it forward a little bit. But if I wanted to just flatten a more complicated surface, you can hit S. And in this case, we want to do that against the x-axis. So again, go to side view, S, X. And if you hit 0, that's X. Oh, sorry, XY. Yeah, we're going to do it against the Y. S, Y, 0. That's just going to completely flatten that surface. So you get a flat surface there. And just going to make sure it's going into the drawer, like so. And then let's go to solid view again and shade smooth. And if you see these weird artifacts, that's probably because we didn't put enough geometry, but let's see if auto smooth fixes that. It doesn't, but it doesn't really matter at this point. I think once we add color and zoom out, it won't show as much. So there you have it. There's the drawer. The spacing for this one seems a little bit more extreme than the image. I won't go back and tweak that right now, but feel free to do so afterwards if you want. Let's move on to the next object, which will be, and I think this might be our final object. Let's go with the pot here, potted plant. So again, I'm just gonna go back to my desk. If you wanted to tweak the 3D cursor manually, so far we've been doing cursor to selected by hitting Shift S, and that would snap to the middle of a surface. But if I wanted to place something on the right side, directly. You can hit Shift and use your right mouse button, and that should move your 3D cursor along a surface that you're clicking on. So if I put it along this, you'll notice that it's flat on the surface of the monitor, whereas if I put it on the desk, it's going to be on the desk. Same with the drawer, it's going to be on the drawer. So for now, I'm just going to put it onto my desk here. So that's Shift right mouse button. And then let's add a cylinder to start with. Shift A, cylinder. And for this one, if you have all the rendering power to do so, feel free to increase the number, because even at 8, if I scale it down, you will notice some imperfections. So if you have the rendering power, you could go and increase the vertices amount here. I'll stick with 10 for now, but I'm going to scale it down and raise it up. Let me decrease the height a little bit, so scale SZ, move it down. If you go back to the image here, you'll notice that the base is a little bit smaller than the outer circle here. So we're going to achieve that by adding some loop cuts to the middle. Okay, so hit Tab, Control R, and let's add 2, maybe 3. Let me see. Okay, let's add 2 loop cuts, or let's add 4 actually. So 4 cuts, and then we want to select these 2 here, these 2, or maybe just this one for now. Let's select this edge loop. So that's Alt and clicking on one of these. And I'm going to enable proportional editing, which is this here, this button, or you can hit O on your keyboard, and that should enable it. And we've used this a little bit in the first render for the calendar, but if you hit S here, you'll see that circle which applies that's the area of influence. And if I use my scroll wheel to decrease that circle, you're giving it less area of influence. So it's gonna tweak whatever's in that circle. So for my purposes, I'm going to decrease it to about this much. Let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, S. And zooming in is numpad period. You'll be able to zoom into what you've selected. And then let's do S. And all I want to do is edit it horizontally. I don't want to increase it vertically. So I'm just going to scale it by hitting S and then Shift Z to do it along the X and Y axis. And just tweak it so that you don't want any sharp edges. Like this one, if I increase it too much, I get some sharp edges here. So I want to make sure that I'm increasing the outer circle so that it's not doing it. So something like this would work. And then within this dropdown, there's multiple ways to, it's basically adjusting the curve of the influence that you're creating for the other faces around it. So if I did sharp, which is this, it'll tweak in a different way. Like you'll notice that the edges around are a little bit sharper. Sphere would evenly distribute that change. Actually, I think we might have wanted to use sphere instead of smooth, because smooth doesn't completely make it round. So I'm just going to go undo that change. Select sphere, and then maybe tweak it this way. And then you want to make sure it's only on the horizontal axis, so Shift Z if you want to do that. And then let's do shade smooth and go to auto smooth normals and change the angle value there. This image looks a little bit higher in height, so let's do that. I'm gonna go to edit mode, select all for A, and you want to make sure this is off now. So click on that or hit O again. Shift A, make it a little bit higher, and then move it up. And again, if you wanted to change the origin point so that it's on the bottom, you wouldn't have to move this up. Okay, with that being done, I'm going to create a place for the dirt and the plant to grow on. So let's select this top face, hit I, move it in, and for these beveled edges, to achieve this stylistic look, I try to go for thicker edges here. You'll notice that's happening in the pencil case too. It is a thicker edge than what we see in real life. So for this pot, we're going to do the same thing. We've insetted that face, E to extrude down. And let's just extrude it a little bit. I don't want to extrude too much. And then let's select these inner and outer. And we're just going to round it so we have a nice curved surface. Shift B. And before we do that, I'm just going to make sure that my scale values are correct. It's not. So I'm just going to reset scale, which is Control A, scale. And then let's bevel this like so. And if you feel like this bugs you, like the angled corners here, that's because we didn't create enough geometry from the start. So if we wanted to reset that, we would just have to go back and create a cylinder and increase this number. But just because I'm lazy, I'm just going to create more cuts here in between and just increase the scale on that. So loop cuts here. I don't recommend this method. I would recommend, if you can, just making sure that the number of counts or number of segments that you have on the shape is enough so that you don't have to tweak this later. But for now, I'm just going to create edge loops in between each face. And I'm just going to select those. Make sure you're selecting the ones in between. And then we're going to scale it horizontally so that it's more round, like so. So we got rid of those angles there. It's looking a bit rounder. And then let's create another object for the dirt. We don't have to, but that's what I'd want to do for this one. So let's select the top face inside, and then just duplicate that. Shift D, hit enter, and let's separate it again, which is P for separate. I don't know why it's that command, but and then go back to object mode, select only that top face, and go into edit mode. And we're just going to extrude it up a little bit so that the dirt is somewhat, I mean, it's not going to be visible in this one, but in some of my renders, I do have the dirt visible. If it's like a taller plant that has leaves extending upwards, then you'll want to see some dirt on the bottom. In this case, we won't be seeing that because the leaves will be covering, but we'll just go and create that detail. And then from here, I want to relocate this 3D cursor on top of this. So with the top plate selected, Shift S to relocate that 3D cursor. And then from here, I want to create a plane to start with to create that leaf, one of those leaves. So let's do Shift A plane. And then let's just scale that down. And let's isolate it for now. Let's isolate just that plane by hitting slash on your numpad. And I want to create a longer leaf, so I'm going to decrease it, the scale along the X in edit mode. What we're doing is we're just creating one side of that leaf and we're going to extend it up so there's volume. So if you've done that, let's create a few cuts here in the middle. That's Control R. And I'll just create 2 cuts for now. And let's move that down a little bit to here. So from this point, I want to select these 4 corners. So that's vertex select 1 on your keyboard. Select the 4 corners by hitting Shift. And then let's scale it on the X so that it's thinner on this side. And it doesn't have to be completely perfect at this point. We're going to use the subdivision modifier to smooth it out. So no worries if it looks a little bit wonky, but I'm just going to tweak maybe the middle one so that it's a little bit narrower here. So you should get something like this at the end. Okay, with that being done, I'm going to extrude this upwards. So hit A to select everything, and then E to extrude upward, like so. And then from here, I'm going to go to the modifier panel again and select subdivision surface. So that adds a bit of depth and curves to the object. Let's increase the level, the amount of subdivision. And there is a hotkey for this, if I had to undo it. Control number key should apply subdivision with that amount of subdivision. So if I hit Control 3, and the number key is on the top, not the numpad, that should apply 3 levels of viewport subdivision. If you wanted to match that for the render, you would have to increase this number. The reason why this is separated, and I think it's because when you're previewing your designs, you don't want to have the computer processing your full, like all the different faces. It just takes longer to preview if you have this number high up, so that's why I think it's separated. For render, you definitely want it higher if you want more, I guess, less angles in your object. So I'm just going to shade smooth this. And it is looking a bit round. I'm going to add a loop cut in the middle just so it's a bit flatter. And then I could select this face here and then move it upwards just to give it more shape, like so. And I haven't done this in my image reference, but let's go ahead and create like a middle section of this leaf. So add a loop cut there. And if we move it down, you'll notice it creates another curve in the middle so that that insets. We could do it this way, or let me see if this works. If I create it. Yeah, I think this might work better. So what I've done is created a loop cut in the middle, but using my, just create one for now. Hit escape. And then from this point, we want to create 2 more cuts. So increase your number of cuts with your scroll wheel, and then make it so that, and then let's just lower these faces here, or these edges. If you wanted to select an edge along the curve from a starting point to an end, you can do so by hitting Control. So select with your starting edge selected, hit Control, and then hit the end, and Blender will automatically connect those 2 vertices or edges, and you'll be able to select a series of edges in this case. So I'm just gonna lower this top face here. Maybe I'll lower the bottom too. So because of the subdivision, you can't see the edge, the base model of the bottom. You won't be seeing these edges here. So you can either go to wireframe view, which is a little bit more confusing in my opinion, because you're seeing both the base object and the subdivision model. So what I do is just select the bottom face here, and then Control, select the top one. Sorry, the edges. So select the bottom edge and the top edge, and then just move that down a little bit, like so. And I could have totally just selected the edge by hitting Alt and selecting it, but might have just missed that. So with that being done, I'm gonna go back to this view. So hit slash on your keyboard, and then let's move the, so right now the origin point is in the middle of this leaf. What I want to do is move it to the bottom of it, so that when I scale it, it's scaling from that bottom. So actually, let's go back to isolate view, and then you can either select all these faces and reorient, or you can just select this one edge or this one vertex here and then just do it that way. But that is Shift S, and then actually I didn't move it. Shift S. Okay, and then back to object mode, right click, origin to 3D cursor, and then let's move the leaf a little bit forward. And now that we have the origin point on the base, we can rotate it around that. So let's do R, rotating around the X. And now it's rotating based on that dot, which is pulled to the bottom. I'm just going to rotate it a little bit upwards. And let's go to top view. I'm just going to duplicate this object and rotate it around the Z. So in this view, you don't have to specify an axis because we are on the top view. Duplicate that again, hit R, and let's rotate that. So you have some nice leaves here. I do want to make it a little bit flatter on the bottom, and as it goes upwards, it's being raised. So let's see if I can do it this way. Okay, so if with multiple objects selected, you could tweak one by one like so, but if you wanted to do that together, select all of these, hit R, and if you do, it's just rotating the whole thing together. What we want to do is rotate it along the local x-axis of each object, meaning there's a concept of global axis, which is these 3 lines in Blender, but then per object, there is a local axis. So for this one, we've rotated by 240. If I wanted to see the local x-axis of this object, I can hit R X once. That'll give you the global, it'll rotate along the global. But if you hit X again, that's going to rotate along the local axis of that object. So that's what we're doing. We're going to be selecting all three, hitting R, X twice, and then just moving it down, like so. And then let's just duplicate all three by doing Shift S, move it upwards, and we're going to rotate it around the Z so that it's not, we have more of an interesting look to it. And as I said, I'm going to raise these leaves as they go upwards. And they also decrease in size as it goes up, so let's scale it down. And that's another thing that's, like, since we had that base or the origin point anchored to the base of the leaf, you can do scale like this very easily on multiple objects. Okay, and then I'm just going to duplicate again, move it up, rotate it, and then RXX to raise the angle a bit. And that's your plant. So it doesn't look exactly like this. It doesn't have to. But I am quite happy with how this is looking. Maybe I'll add one more layer to it. So Shift D, move it up. And if this looks a little bit uniform to you, what I usually do is I just go ahead and select individual leaves and just tweak it just slightly so that it doesn't look too uniform. So you can rotate it, maybe you can change the scale of these certain leaves, but that's just another process I go through if I wanted to make it look less uniform. Okay, so with that, we do have 5 more minutes. Does anyone have questions around what we've done today? And Uju, I believe you were able to follow. Hopefully the recording will help. Next time I will try to find a way to either decrease the stream quality or just make it work so that everyone can watch it and follow along, because that is the purpose of this workshop. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm seeing nothing. So with that, I think we can wrap it up. Next week, we will be modeling the speaker, the keyboard, pencil case. I think we got through most of, like, it's a little bit faster than I expected, so maybe we'll be able to model the board on the back, or I can touch upon a little bit on animation, because I do have an animated version of this. So maybe we can vote on what we want to do for the third session, but let's try to get to a good point next week so we can add additional stuff to this. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I will see you guys next week.